Good afternoon. Listen, we don't have much time, less than half an hour. That's not enough. So I'm going to go through this presentation very, very quickly. So please pay attention. Because you know what? If the real and ultimate measure of intelligence is what you do when you don't know what to do, then the next few weeks, months, and quarters will test the economic IQ of every central banker in the universe, because they are the first to admit that they have no clue what's happening. You know, this level of uncertainty, just to illustrate, you know, not too long ago, I was in Saskatoon. It was a long day full of many boring meetings, and late at night I took a flight home. So I had three options what to do during my flight. One was to read my book, the other was to watch a movie, the third was to calculate the output elasticity of the manufacturing sector to changes in interest rates. So after 20 minutes of back of the envelope calculations, I came up with a number. The number was 0.9. Fine. The day after, I went to my office, I put it in my newsletter and forgot about it. 2 weeks after, I had a meeting with the Bank of Canada, and I meet with the Bank of Canada very often, unfortunately. No, really, they never give you a straightforward answer. They believe in what they call constructive ambiguity. You know, you ask them for the telephone number, they give you an estimate. Believe me, it's a fair. In any case, we had this meeting, and one item on the agenda was this output elasticity. And to my surprise, their number was 0.9, my number. I must tell you, I was very impressed. You know, after all, they have an army of PhDs. I was doing it being jet-lagged from Saskatoon. We came up with the exact same number. So after 2 long hours, I couldn't resist anymore, and I asked, can you tell me what kind of assumptions did you use to come up with this number? And they said, actually, we used your number. What I'm telling you here is that the blind leads the blind. Nobody has a clue what's happening. That's where we are in the cycle. And that's why what's happening with Trump is extremely important. Listen, I did not predict that Trump will win, although I should have. I'll tell you why. Because, you know, during the campaign, you have Trump running, you have to use some humor, you have to have some jokes. So whenever I was joking about Trump in Toronto, Vancouver, people were laughing. I was in New York, Boston, Phoenix, nothing. People were kind of nervous laughter. And I remember telling myself, maybe this is bigger than you think. So I should have predicted, I didn't. But let me make another prediction. I predict that he will be a one-term president for 3 reasons. One, I think that after 4 years, he will say, you know what, this is too much work, this is not for me. The second, I really believe that by 2018, 2019, he will be fighting with Congress like there is no tomorrow. We'll talk about it in a second, over that. But the third reason, and the most important reason, is the fact that this problem that Trump is trying to solve, jobs, this problem simply does not have a solution. That's the elephant in the room that no politician will never admit. This problem simply does not have a solution. I'm talking about the mismatch in the labor market. We have people without jobs, and we have jobs without people. And you cannot fix this mismatch very quickly. Every first Friday of the month at 8:30 in the morning, we get the employment numbers from the US. 8:30 in the morning, first Friday of the month. So at 8:29, every economist is sitting in front of her computer looking, waiting, anticipating the numbers. Believe me, it's very exciting. And every time we look at the numbers, we look at number and we look at wages, and we don't see wages rising. Let me illustrate. Look at this chart. This is the very famous Phillips curve in economics, namely the relationship between the unemployment rate and wages. Whenever the unemployment rate goes down, wages should go up because the bargaining power of labor goes up. Makes sense? That's the very famous Phillips curve. By the way, this guy Phillips, he got a Nobel Prize for this. Now, that's economics 101. That's real life. Now, I don't know what it is, but it's not the Phillips curve. According to this, the US economy is failing economics 101. This funny chart is Brexit. This funny chart is Trump. That's the message of those who are not participating in the process of economic recovery. They are not part of the labor market. That's their cry. It's not about China. It's not about Mexico. Manufacturing jobs have been going down way before NAFTA, way before China entered the WTO. For every job we lost to trade, we lost 8 to automation and technology. This is not about China. It's about a mismatch in the labor market. We have people without jobs, and we have jobs without people. The participation rate is down. This means that millions of people are not even participating in the labor market. They're not even looking. That's their cry, and Trump is their messenger. Long-term unemployment. It is now higher than it used to be in the peak of the '91 recession. That's their cry. And Trump is the messenger. When you have more people collecting disability insurance than production workers, you know that something is changing. That's their cry. This is not about people not liking Hillary. This is much bigger than that. So the question is, can we have Trump here in Canada? I think it will be naive to believe that we are totally immune to this trend. The quality of employment in Canada is going down, income gap is widening, and the number of people making less than average wage is rising. We are not immune to this trajectory. And by the way, it's not just about very uneducated people. It's about educated people as well. Listen to this. Canada is the most educated country in the OECD in terms of the number of people going to universities. The most educated country. But we are also the #1 country in terms of the number of educated people that live in poverty. We simply cannot translate those degrees into jobs. And the question is why, and the answer is 2 hours. But one of them is the field of study, what people are studying. It's not enough to have a university degree. We all know that. I met the other day, I met a person, she told me, my son has 2 MAs and he cannot find a job. And I said, MAs in what? The field of study, we know what we need. You look at the distribution of the field of study, it's the exact same distribution that it was 15 years ago. Hasn't changed. You know, I gave a presentation somewhere about something else, and a professor was talking before me, and he was telling us about his son. He said, my son, when he was very young, he used to say, I love my room, I love this house, I will never leave this house. Today, his son is doing his PhD in philosophy. So I guess he was not joking. So that's the background. That's the background that we have to understand. This is bigger. And then we have France and we have Germany coming. That's Brexit. It's big. We have to understand that, and we are not immune. So that's the background. Now let's go and take a look at some pockets of uncertainty and see what's interesting and what's not. Now, Trump is inheriting a good economy. The global economy, in fact, in 2017 is going to be better than in 2016. Why? Because we injected so much money into the system. Every central bank was printing money, taking interest rates to negative. You know the story. We have so much injection of money into the system. There is a lot of wind. And if you generate enough wind, even pigs can fly. And that's exactly what's happening. But this is a mirage. We are going to reach the peak of the global cycle by mid-2017 because we don't have enough ammunition. The real story is not an acceleration. That's the real story. That's the real story that explains Trump, Brexit, and what's happening in France. The global economy is slowing down. The potential growth of the global economy is slowing down. This is about demographics. This is about productivity. We know the story. This is not something negative. This is just the reality that we are all operating in. And even Trump cannot reverse it because this is a major demographic force. The speed limit The running speed of the global economy everywhere is going down. In Japan, in the Eurozone, in the US, we are basically, in many ways, turning Japanese, at least a North American version of Japan. That's something that we have to respect. And interest rates will rise. They will be higher, but they will not be high. That's something that we have to accept because of that. Even in China, although we don't know what's happening in China. Who knows what's happening in China? You know, I know somebody that is an economist at the Central Bank of China, and I asked him one day, between us, tell me, is it true that the Chinese Communist Party is telling you guys what numbers to put in your models? And he said, absolutely not. He said, we have 100% autonomy. Nobody's telling us what to do. We can use whatever numbers we want as long as the answer is 6.5. Because 6.5, as you know, is just the target of the Communist Party for GDP, and miracle of miracles, they are stabilizing at 6.5. It's amazing what they can do over there. Well, I think China is at 4% if they're lucky, but that's a different story. It's going down. It's going down. And that's something that we have to respect. That's a speed limit, and Trump, nobody can reverse it. So given that, let's discuss some other pockets. The Eurozone. I believe from day one, I believe that the Euro was a mistake. Let's face it, you cannot put Germany and Italy together and expect something good to happen. So I do believe that now, never before, have I seen a situation in which so much of the stability or maybe the very existence of the euro depends on one person, and this person is Angela Merkel. She's the glue that is keeping this euro together. And if the market is starting to tweet about the possibility of her losing the elections in the fall, the euro is vulnerable. We still have France coming, and the euro is vulnerable. I've been shorting the euro for the past 8 months, and I will stay away until I get the green light from Germany. I believe that France will be fine, and eventually Germany will be fine, and then I will be longing the euro like there is no tomorrow, because the economy there is doing okay, and the ECB will start actually removing liquidity from the system. But between now and then, I'm staying away because there is too much noise, too much uncertainty, given the election cycle over there, especially Germany, which is a big one. What's happening in the UK, Brexit? Well, they voted out, but for 6 months they had no clue what to do. They were basically trying to figure out what to do. She was really inconsistent, and then in January she gave a speech and said, we are out. We are out, clear exit. Unfortunately, Trump is now president, and now she has to deal with Trump from a position of weakness. Because under the umbrella of the EU, she could have fought Trump. Now she needs Trump more than Trump needs her. She's in a very difficult position. She's starting to negotiate with the EU a free trade agreement. It's not going to happen. She needs Trump. She wants free trade. He wants something else. The timing of Brexit for her was terrible. So that's the UK. And the UK is very complex. I'm staying away from the sterling at this point, given how complex the situation is. I think at one point the sterling will be a very good buying opportunity. I'm not there yet. China is much more interesting. China now can move markets. I believe that 2 years ago China was unable to move markets because people were operating under the assumption that regardless what happens, the Chinese Communist Party has the monetary might, the fiscal might, and the political ability to deal with whatever happens. Because after all, in China, you don't have to run anything by Congress. You just do it. And then something happened. I remember the market crashed, and we all know that the market in China is nothing more than a casino. It crashed. And the government made the mistake of putting that credibility on the line and tried to save not the economy, but the stock market, and you cannot. You cannot save the stock market even if you are the Chinese Communist Party. This crisis is a crisis of credibility, not a crisis of fundamentals in China. And they have to labor very, very hard in order to regain that credibility while doing something very difficult, as you're all aware, trying to get more consumption and less investment, less manufacturing, less exports. Very difficult to do because every small change in the manufacturing base of China is millions of people losing their jobs, and you have the risk of a Chinese spring. And we are seeing already some signs of panic. Look at the red line, that's credit. Credit in China is rising now at 22% a year. And 85% of this credit is going where? It's going to real estate. And we all know that the last thing that China needs is another empty shopping mall. So this is a clear reflection of a government that is panicking. But more than that, if they panic a bit more, and that can happen, they will go to what they know best, and that's the currency. They will try to manipulate the currency to lead to export-led recovery and devalue the currency. We have been to this movie before. You go to China, and I'm sure that many of you visited China, you speak to people, and they will tell you the number one risk for them is a large-scale devaluation of the yuan. And from here, the link to the condo market in Toronto and Vancouver is very clear. You know, I had a dinner with 22 real estate agents and brokers dealing only with Chinese investors. And the reason why I wanted to have this dinner is because of the fact that this is the way you get information about foreign investment. Believe me, you don't get information from Stats Canada. You need to speak to people. So they arranged this dinner for me, and I had many, many questions. And after a few bottles of wine, I got some answers. And I can tell you that the number one reason why money is leaving China is the risk of a large-scale devaluation. More money, not less, will be leaving China. And now we have this tug of war between China and its people. People are trying to get money out of China. The government is trying to stop them. But never underestimate the ability, the creativity of Chinese business people and their ability to get money out through Hong Kong and all kinds of other tricks. They are doing it now, and it's coming here. It's coming to Vancouver, it's coming to Seattle. We are seeing it in real estate and elsewhere. More money, not less, will be leaving China. Very quickly, I'm longing energy. I think that Trump is a friend of the energy sector. Now, we have to understand what's happening in the energy sector. This is basically the supply curve that we're dealing with, which is really three supply curves. One is the cheap one, OPEC, the other is the US, and the third, the expensive one, that's us. The reason why I don't see prices rising significantly is because of US production. It seems that OPEC and Saudi Arabia is now willing to tolerate 50, 55, even $60 a barrel. That's when US production is waking up, and that's why you see production rising, capacity rising, and therefore it will be very difficult to go above $60, where we need to be. So I'm not sure that this is over for Alberta. This is, the fourth, the fifth inning when it comes to Alberta. Yes, activity will improve. Yes, the worst is over, but it's not a V-shaped recovery because the real price manager in the market is really US production. And they have unlimited ability to influence prices through supply. And if Saudi Arabia is willing to tolerate 55, 60, and it seems that they're willing at this point, then they will be very active there. I'm longing US energy first, and then Canadian energy. I think, given the fact that Trump is not exactly green, energy will do well. Let's talk about Trump. Trump has been signing executive orders at the speed of light. Every day he's signing something. Why? Because he's dealing with the easy stuff. You know what? Killing TPP was very easy because TPP was dead. Infrastructure, he's signing a piece of paper. We'll talk about it in a second. Deregulation, happening, but not so quickly. Energy, as I mentioned, Keystone. Personal tax, corporate tax cuts, clearly happening. Even cash repatriation, very easy to do. Building a wall, even easier. Trade is not easy. When it comes to trade, I think that his pen will run out of ink because trade is difficult. We'll talk about it in a second, but let me demonstrate why I believe he will be fighting with Congress. Because everything costs money. And if you are a Republican, even Congress, even Paul Ryan at this point will tell you, you cut taxes, you get the economic growth, and then you don't have to borrow because the debt to GDP ratio will stabilize. That's basically the logic. Makes sense? But for this, you need like 4% GDP growth, and that's what basically they are counting on. They will not get 4% GDP growth. First, you have to fight a very strong downward trend because of the demographic story. Remember the speed limit. But beyond that, the effectiveness of those policies, very limited. First, for example, infrastructure. The mother of all infrastructure spending is coming. According to Trump, that will create 50,000 jobs a year over the next 4 years. Wonderful. But the US economy generates 2.5 million jobs a year. That's a rounding error. That's not a game changer. So this infrastructure boom will not generate much GDP. Then you have the income tax coming. 70 to 80% of it will be going to the top 10%. Namely, those people are not spending, they are saving. Their propensity to spend is very marginal. Therefore, the contribution to GDP will be very limited. What about this $2.3 trillion of cash repatriation? Apple and all those other companies will bring back the money. Wonderful. They will. The way they did in 2004. But most of this money went to stock buybacks. Not to investment, not to hiring. So again, the multiplier, economic multiplier of this will be limited. So what I'm telling you here is that simply he cannot deliver on that because the economic growth that you will get out of it will be half a percentage point, maybe a full percentage point, but no 2 full percentage points. So you will be short. So if I trade Trump, I'm not trading Trump on growth. I'm trading him on inflation because Trump is inflationary. Trump is not Reagan. People compare Trump to Reagan. He is not. Because Reagan, when he started to stimulate the economy, the debt to GDP ratio was 30%. The economy was in a recession and interest rates were going down. Trump, the debt to GDP ratio is 100% already. The economy is at full potential already, and interest rates are rising. Every aspect of Trump's policy is inflationary, and that's why the correction in the bond market is sustainable. More than that, I think interest rates will rise even further because of the debt situation. He cannot pay for it, as I suggested. GDP will not pay for it. He will have to borrow. And that's when Paul Ryan and Ted Cruz will wake up and say, no way. And that's when the honeymoon will be over. But in between, the long end of the curve will respond to increased debt requirements, and that's exactly what we're going to see. That's why I think that the bond market is not a very friendly place. I think that the bond market will continue to correct, and the correction is sustainable. What about trade? I don't think it will move very fast on trade because trade is complicated. First of all, the border tax, the border adjusted tax, the BAT, it's not going to happen anytime soon because it's against WTO, and it will allow Canada and Mexico, and I had some discussions with people from Mexico. You will be surprised. I think that Mexico will be fighting. We are basically looking at Mexico and say, 29% of their economy is the US economy, therefore they will do whatever he says. You know what? You will be surprised. They will fight hard back. And you know what? It's going to be difficult. Trade is difficult because one issue is that not only is it against WTO, but also the ultimate reasoning might be that the cure is going to be worse than the disease. Namely, what he's trying to fix and what he's doing will be worse than what actually is going to get because of few reasons. One is that you impose a tariff or a border tax, you are penalizing the bottom line, the bottom earners. Because it's a de facto tax, yeah? All those plasma TVs that they're buying for $300, they will cost them $2,000. We know the story. China was a major disinflationary force. That was actually a de facto tax cut. You remove that, you impose a tariff, and you raise taxes on who? the lower end of the income spectrum. And remember, those guys are not getting the tax cuts. The top 10% are getting. So he's hurting exactly those people who voted for him. That's not a good idea. But much more important than that, is what we call the shadow price. What they will be missing. The fastest growing segment of the global economy today is emerging markets, but not just emerging markets, the consumer of emerging markets. We all know that. And we see China trying to encourage more consumption. That's the way it's going. I'm talking about the Y generation in China. 250 million young Chinese people who never experienced poverty in their lives. Their propensity to consume is higher than the average American teenager. And what those sophisticated consumers want is not junk. The junk, they send to us. What they want is high quality brand name. That's the future of North American manufacturing. And exactly when you have more and more people able and willing to buy your stuff, you are reducing access to their markets by imposing a de facto trade war. The shadow price of reduced access to emerging market consumers will cost the American economy dearly. The cure is worse than the disease. And he knows that, and if he doesn't, he will. What I think he will do what Reagan did when he negotiated with the Japanese. He will go with Paul Ryan and say, move this, this tax adjustment, the border adjusted tax. Start with it. Start cooking. Take 2 years. Don't run the bill, just start working on it. So we know that there is something cooking. And when you know that there's something cooking, and you go to China and Mexico and say, I have this, so let's negotiate. I think that's the way it's going to happen. So it will not be an actual bill, it will not be actually happening, but it will be some sort of potential weapon when they negotiate. To me, that's the way they're going to use tariff and border adjusted tax. They're actually not going to do it. They will use it as a weapon in the background. One point, if you're into financials in the US, why American banks are up by 30% since November 8th? Why? Yes, tax cuts. Yes, the yield curve is moving in the right direction. Why? The number one reason is Dodd-Frank, deregulation. Absolutely. You ask, I did a survey among our traders. Number one reason, he is going to kill Dodd-Frank. And I say, not so fast. It's not so easy. First of all, you need 60 votes in the Senate. You have only 52. And Elizabeth Warren in the Senate, she is running the campaign to save Dodd-Frank. She is very powerful. Schumer is also doing it. There is also an alternative act. It's called the Financial Choice Act. Basically saying, we are not killing Dodd-Frank, but we are saying if you are a bank and you want to be free from all those regulations, like the stress test and all this business, fine, you can do that. But you have to have 10% leverage ratio. Now, the average in the US now is 625. It means that you have to pay 4% leverage ratio in order to free yourself. Not too many banks will be doing it. What I'm saying here is that to the extent that you are longing American financials because of deregulations and Dodd-Frank dying, I will be a bit careful here. Because he will not be able to kill Dodd-Frank the way he will not be able to impose a tariff tomorrow. The market is using all the good news without looking at the bad news, and that's fine. And as long as it doesn't touch it, as long as it's not trying to do it, namely trade or Dodd-Frank, and just keep it the way it is, this market can continue like that, or at least stabilize at current levels for a while. But if we start actually discussing trade, and there is a de facto semi-trade war with China, this market can correct because it is expensive. Very quickly, let me say something about Canada. Canada, we should be booming by now. When the dollar is down from parity to 75 cents, according to common sense economics 101, we should be booming, but we are not booming. We are not booming. The question is why the manufacturing sector in Canada is unable to take advantage of the weak loonie. 3 reasons. One, of course, we lost market share to Mexico. We know the story. Second is that during the dark days of parity, and parity was an economic accident. We had no business being at parity. But during this period, we lost 10% capacity in our manufacturing sector. So now we won't, but we can't, because we have to rebuild that capacity. And the third reason is that 70% of what we sell to the US is going to the manufacturing sector in the US. And we know because of the strong American dollar, which is the opposite of our weak loonie, the strong American dollar is hurting manufacturing. That's the only thing that is not moving in the US. So the strong dollar is hurting them, and therefore we cannot take advantage of our weak dollar because 70% of what we are selling to the US is going to the manufacturing sector in the US. So there are many reasons and excuses. That's why I believe that if the Fed moves 3 times this year, and I think they will, the Bank of Canada will do nothing. Because we have a Bank of Canada with an agenda. And the agenda is a weaker Canadian dollar. Everything that this bank is doing is designed to lower the value of the dollar. Otherwise, why are you cutting interest rates? Are you trying to stimulate credit? You can't. Interest rates are so low to start with, you cannot do that. We have a generation of Canadians that never experience high or even rising interest rates. For them, those extremely low mortgage rates, that's the norm. So it's not as exciting as it used to be. Yeah? You know, low interest rates is like being in a relationship. In the first few weeks, you are so excited you cannot breathe. But if after 5 years you cannot breathe, you have asthma. What I'm telling you here is that monetary policy is asymmetrical. Lower interest rates cannot lift you. Higher interest rates can kill you. As a society, we have never been so sensitive to the risk of higher interest rates. We know that. But the Bank of Canada is cutting interest rates just to lower the value of the dollar. And I don't know if you remember, when they cut interest rates 2 years ago in January, it was a huge surprise. I'm sure that all of you remember. It was a huge surprise. Nobody expected that. They cut interest rates. And by the way, the Bank of Canada will never admit that that's the case. The governor gave a speech and he said, we do not have a dollar agenda. The dollar is off the table. And I say it is never an official policy until somebody officially denies it, yeah? You know, I think it's an official policy. And when they cut interest rates, and it was a huge surprise, huge, it was a shock. I remember I met with Pollard and his crew a week after. And the story in Toronto that in a small boutique research company, they actually fired 2 young analysts because they didn't predict that the Bank of Canada will cut interest rates. They fired 2 kids. So when I met with Pollard, I told him, in Toronto, they fired 2 kids because they didn't predict that you will cut interest rates. And I said, at the minimum, this rate cut should generate 2 jobs. You know, just to break even. I don't think it generated even 1 job because the effectiveness of monetary policy is 0. And that's why fiscal policy is really the way to go. I'm totally out of time. The bottom line is that we have a friend when it comes to the dollar at the central bank. Pollard will not touch interest rates until mid-2018, and he will allow the Fed to go 75 basis points, even 100 basis points before moving. And this means that the dollar might go down even further, and we're starting to see it already today. So bottom line, just to sum up, we are in uncharted territory. Predicting Trump is very difficult. But I think that common sense suggests that when it comes to trade, he will move very, very slowly, and the effectiveness of his policies will not lift the economy to the extent that they are expecting. This will lead to a debt crisis, and this will lead to highly volatile environment in the second half of his mandate. That's the way I see the situation. Canada probably will underperform the US in 2017 and 2018, reflecting the uncertainty regarding NAFTA, regarding trade. The US will benefit from some of those tax cuts, and that's why the US will rise by 2.5%. We might manage 1.8, 1.9. if we are lucky. So overall, I suggest that clearly this is a transition period that we have to go through. There is a way to trade this madness if we actually read the economic map correctly, because after this mother of all recessions and after these elections, what was normal in the past is not normal in the context of today's economy. Okay? Thank you very much for your attention.